Okay, so here's part two of the Victorian Age. I was going to have Mona do it. She was not interested. So we were just talking about who's in the middle class. And you had this group that doesn't seem to have a lot in common, right? So the prime minister and the banker, they're pretty close to one another in terms of status. But what does the bank president and the bank teller have in common? What does the school teacher and the lawyer have in common? What does the guy with a hot dog cart and a college professor have in common? May not seem like anything. Well, the reality is that then and now, the middle class is tied together by a common set of values. In other words, they stand for the same thing no matter where they are in the class. Middle class then and now believed that hard work equals achievement. In other words, if you work hard, you will get ahead. Not maybe, not whatever. You will get ahead. And today, see, we still believe that, and it's frustrating when that doesn't happen. So that middle class value that virtually all of us have been brought up on doesn't always seem to work today, and that makes people mad, understandably. The middle class also believed that the home and the family were extremely important. So the family and the home were the cornerstones of your existence. Now, thirdly, and you can decide whether this is the case today or not, the middle class believed that the husband was the master of the home, and the wife really was viewed as kind of like a superior servant. Now, it might seem like this is, something sexist. I don't know what the word is. The reality is the wife was actually really important in the middle class household, and she had some very important responsibilities. She kept the household accounts. In other words, she's the one that balanced the checkbook, so to speak. And it had to be that way because, see, she was the one that bought all the groceries. And, in a middle class neighborhood in the city, groceries came to you mostly. So she had to be there to buy what she needed for the day or the weekend or whatever. So she had to know how much money was available. Also, the middle class wife directed the servants. Now you might say, oh, well, servants, that doesn't sound like a very middle class thing to have. Well, guess what? If you were in the middle class, you had a servant. I mean, if you were the bank president or whatever, obviously you had a whole staff, right? You had a butler and a maid and a cook and nannies or whatever. But even if you were down near the bottom of the middle class, unless you just absolutely could not spare the money, you had somebody come in and do something. Usually the thing would be laundry because at the time, laundry was literally an entire day's work, and usually on a Thursdays when the middle class families would do it, the middle class wife would do it, and it was literally sun up to sundown laundry. So you think you have a bad washing like half a load once a week, an entire day. So if nothing else, you would have somebody come in and do the laundry or take the laundry away. And if you didn't have a servant, it kind of knocked you down a notch. The middle class wife was also responsible for the moral education of the children. Dad could not do this. He was not capable of doing it. And another thing the middle class wife did that sounds a little fluffy or whatever, but actually very important, was that the middle class wife maintained social contacts for the family by calling on women of similar position. So the wives of all the bank presidents are hanging out together. The wives of all the lawyers are hanging out together at tea parties and stuff like that. Sounds fluffy, sounds like a waste of time. But if you think about those occupations that we mentioned, business people, whatever, a lot of them rely on referrals and connections. So you had to maintain those connections because the husband's business and livelihood may depend on it. Perhaps not surprisingly, most women were not encouraged intellectually. Most of them had a pretty basic education, what I like to call a dinner party education, which meant that the wife could read and write. She had to be able to do that. She knew basics about, sort of culture or whatever. And then she learned, while she was growing up, she learned some sort of a skill or talent that she could show off at a dinner party. So I call it a dinner party education because the middle class is all about having dinner parties. And so it's like, well, so-and-so is hosting and, Mrs. So-and-so is going to sing for us or Mrs. So-and-so is going to read her poetry or whatever. And so that was, you had to have that. What's weird about all this is that in Britain, Queen Victoria herself worked very hard to appear to be the ideal middle class wife. And look, there's very few people in the world that were less middle class than Queen Victoria. But it shows you how dominant those values were. I mean, she tried to appear to be moral, very domestic, lots of photo opportunities with her kids. And look, Queen Victoria hated her kids when they were little. I mean, she despised them. But she needed to show that, look, this is what the wife does. Queen Victoria had mostly middle-class advisors. It made sense because we're in the Industrial Revolution, and so those are the people that know about what's going on. But she surrounded herself with middle-class advisors. And look, she had a notorious temper, like you did not want to be around. And she curbed her temper out of respect for her husband, even though she was the ruler. I mean, he is prince, she is the queen. But she curbed her temper out of respect for him. Now, there was one way the middle-class wife was thought to be superior to the husband, and that's that she was thought of as the better half because she was pure and untainted. And as such, it was her responsibility and one of her main duties to encourage what Queen Victoria called the husband's higher nature rather than what Queen Victoria called the husband's shadow side. In other words, women were not supposed to encourage their husbands sexually in any way. Now, this is obviously going to be very interesting, but I'm going to go to another video, so I'll be right back, and this will be part 3.